Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Broadwater, and I'm an associate teacher at Columbus ATC. Uh, I say good afternoon. It might be good morning or good night, depending upon when you're listening to this. But in any case, welcome, and I'm happy you're here. I hope that what I have to say today will be helpful to you. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, uh, let's do refuge and bodhicitta in the form of a prayer. So to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, I go for refuge. By the power of generosity and all six perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, I go for refuge. By the power of generosity and all six perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. And the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, I go for refuge. By the power of generosity and all six perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. So again, thank you for being here this morning. Again, I hope that what I have to say will be of some benefit to you. Your time is precious, and I certainly don't want to waste it. So today we're going to talk about faith, what faith means in Buddhism. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to look to see how that faith may change over time. And thirdly, we're going to see what this faith means specifically in terms of a teacher. This is important throughout our path, but particularly as we launch onto the Vajrayana Buddhism. And finally, we're going to see what this faith means when we're looking at a teacher. What's that like? And what I'm going to do today is we're going to use the example of Milarepa with one of his students, Trungpa. And the book I'm using is, and I don't know if this is which way this will show, whether it be a mirror image or not, but this is the book I'm using. It's a rather thick book. It is the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa, which is sort of a misnomer. 100,000 in Tibetan, the word for it also means collection. And so a proper title would be The Collection of Songs of Milarepa, but they maintained the title, The 100,000 Songs. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the student-teacher relationship as it was illustrated in this 100,000 song of Milarepa. So, about faith. Faith is like central to all traditions, faith traditions. Every faith tradition has an element of faith involved in it. And what we find in terms of this faith is that modern life tends to downplay spiritual authority and faith in particular. It seems like there's no authority today that's not being questioned, and particularly faith as it relates to religion. The unfortunate thing is, or the fact is, that science can't really make up for this lack of faith, this expression of faith. It doesn't have the depth and the breadth that faith has within faith traditions. And in this same kind of context of downplaying of faith and authority, in that same context, oftentimes Buddhism is being portrayed as um, nothing more than the science of the mind, where we simply examine experience based upon science and observation. And there is that element that is a part of our tradition where we do examine the mind very much so in very objective terms. Uh, and it is also true that people do come to Buddhism as an alternative to this sort of dogmatic tradition within many faiths. And all I mean by dogma is a set of beliefs, sort of a deposit of beliefs that the religious follower has to adhere to, and that failing to adhere to, you aren't orthodox, you're not a part of the group. Certainly, within Buddhism, there is this intelligent inquiry, and it plays a big part, a big role in our path. That's true. But faith still is an important part of the path. In fact, Milarepa, and I'll discuss him later, as I said, but Milarepa was a great saint within the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, as within many Buddhist traditions. He was a great saint, a great yogi. Um, and he says, uh, he talks about faith in a very positive way. In his 100,000 Songs, he says, and I quote, people without faith are seen as unsuitable vessels for the profound instructions. It's also said that after each talk that Milarepa gave, people came away with greater faith. So faith is important. What is this faith that we speak about in Buddhism that's not so much dogmatic? Well, the best explanation comes from Gampopa, another student of Milarepa. And he says, to travel the Buddhist path, you need certain conditions. You need to have a precious human life with its freedoms. You need an environment that's conducive to practice. And then he says, you need confident faith. That's what Gampopa says. Confident faith, which is really a basic trust in the teachings of the Buddha. How much faith do you need? Well, everybody's different. Some people come to the teachings for the first time with a great deal of faith. Others have to explore. I say it's sort of like some people are leapers, jump right in there into the teachings and accept them wholeheartedly from the beginning. Other people need time to reflect and think about it. But in either case, it's okay, whether you jump in or you need to think about the teachings. Both inquiry and just jumping in is okay. But it depends on the personality of the individual. What Milarepa says and what Gampopa says is it's really important that this faith be genuine and personal. It's no good just to, have this outward expression of confidence. Oh, I love this teacher. It's so wonderful. It's so great. But at the same time, harbor a lot of doubts, many, many doubts. So it's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. It's got to be personal. It's got to be yours. Certainly in the beginning, we're going to have some doubts. And that's okay. And you should express those to your teachers and to your fellow travelers. It's okay. But what's important, even at this stage, is that while you may have some doubts, you lean into the teachings, you lean into your belief in the Buddha with respect. You have a certain amount of respect. If you lack that respect, it's pretty difficult to travel the Buddhist path. I remember I taught one time, during a period of time, there was this fellow that kept showing up and he was expressing his doubts, but basically in a way that suggested he had no respect for religious teaching. It was just he was there to be a disruptor. And I tried to be very compassionate with him and say, try to overcome his doubts with him. But because of his lack of respect, it was really not useful. And in fact, at some point, Lama Kathy, who was taught him one time, she said, "It really sounds like that you can't get on this path, and it's okay, but really disrupting the rest of us is not helpful." So a certain amount of respect for religious teaching in general, and in specifically to Buddhist teaching, is really important, even in the beginning. Rinpoche, when he came up against people's doubts, was very, very compassionate. He would say things like, "Well, it's okay if you don't believe this or don't believe that. Sort of put it in a drawer with the other doubt for the moment and say, I'll come back to it later and continue on if you can." So he had a very open attitude. And then sometimes he would say to folks who raised doubts, if he couldn't explain it in a way they found satisfactory, he said, this is true whether you believe it or not. So he had that sort of attitude. But in any case, it's this traveling this path of Buddhist path requires a certain amount of genuine confidence, genuine trust, and that's really important. And it's trust in the teachings, it's trust in the Buddha, and it's also trust in the good qualities of awakening. You look and you say, the qualities of awakening include being very open, liberated, free. I want those qualities, and I trust that they exist. And so seeing these good qualities and believing in them, you engage in the path. And in engaging in the path, it's basically you have to be actively participating. Otherwise, you won't achieve anything. So you have to engage yourself. And through this engagement, through actively being part of listening to, contemplating, and meditating on the teachings, you become inspired, you create greater interest, and even greater respect. So Buddhist faith is genuine confidence. It's lively, it's interested, and it's inspired. So a better word perhaps than faith in terms of Buddhist belief, a better word would be confidence. And that gets us around this obstacle of dogma. and the misunderstanding that there's dogma within Buddhist practice. The other thing we have to recognize is that faith gets us started. This confidence gets us started. But we also need something else for liberation. We need wisdom, the ability to see things as they really are, the truth. And we do have this capacity to wake up, to see things as they really are. So we need faith and we need wisdom to gain liberation. Lama Kathy has been talking I think it was last Sunday, she was talking about the Vajrayana. And within Tibetan Buddhism, there are three, we practice three vehicles, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. It's an oversimplification, but for the sake of this discussion, we will say that the Hinayana is basically about your personal purification, your personal liberation. The Mahayana is a concern not only for your liberation, but for the liberation of all beings. And so compassion and loving kindness take on a particular relevance in the Mahayana. The Vajrayana is a special, you might say, branch of the Mahayana. You might say that. And the difference being, the big difference being in the techniques, the methods that are used in the Vajrayana. Because both the Mahayana and the Vajrayana have profound views regarding things as they are, a profound view of emptiness. But the Vajrayana has specific techniques. And so, what does faith look like within Vajrayana? Well, it has the same characteristics as the Mahayana, but some special ones based upon the student-teacher relationship. But faith in the Vajrayana, basically there are three aspects. The first aspect is you have to have faith in your own potential to wake up. And that's something you'll work on as you go along. This faith in yourself to wake up. You experience obstacles on the way, and there are remedies for those obstacles to that faith. Then you have to have confidence or faith in a spiritual friend, a guru. And in fact, your faith and confidence in him or her is more important in essence than your faith or confidence in the Buddha, because the Buddha is not here to guide you through the special methods, to give you the practices, to give you the instructions. And guru, a spiritual friend, is. And so you have special regard for them. They're your guide. And then you have to have faith in the process, the methods. In the Vajrayana, faith is not a passive acceptance, but based upon an analysis, you look at things, and you may look for some time at your teacher to gain confidence and gain faith in them. In fact, it's important that you do that. And as a result of your looking at them and observing them and listening to their teachings, and listening to their instructions, you gain what is called devotion. You become devoted to your teacher. Because, as the prayer says, devotion is the key to developing in the Vajrayana. And it's a key to the blessings. And the prayer says, devotion is the head of meditation, as is taught. The guru opens the gate to the treasury of the oral instructions, the instructions that will lead you to understanding your Buddha nature. The other point that we have to make is that it's this faith in your teacher, this devotion to your teacher is ever evolving. It's a genuine, living human experience. And as we will see, it sometimes waxes and wanes. It sometimes increases and sometimes decreases. It's just the way relationships go. One of the ways we can look at this relationship is how it's played out in real life. And one of the examples, one of the good illustrations of that is the relationship between Milarepa and Rechampa. Milarepa, as I again said, was one of the great yogis in the 12th century in Tibet. And he had a student with the name of Rechampa. I love the story, and so I'm going to repeat it today. The story of the relationship between Milarepa and Rechampa. Rechampa went to India and he picked up all kinds of wonderful teachings and texts, and he brought them back to Tibet. And he was very pleased with himself that he had brought them back. He was a good student, by the way. He was not a bad student. You can't criticize him for being a bad student. In fact, he had been a student of Milarepa from the time he was a little kid. And so throughout the songs of Milarepa, he's described as the son. And Milarepa is described as the father. That's how close they had been to one another. It's like a father and son relationship. So I'll go to the story itself. I'll read part of it, and I will sort of summarize other parts because it's a long story. It goes for quite a period of time. So it's the story of the yak horn, and we'll tell about the yak horn in a minute. And one of the things I want to start out with saying is Milarepa never gave up on his students. That's one of the wonderful characteristics of a great teacher. They never give up. And one of the characteristics of his students, which is often the case with students, Rechampa had a great deal of pride. So anyway, the story is that Rechampa was returning from India, and he had all these texts under his arm, and he had all kinds of experiences, and he was really excited about it. So he meets with his teacher, Milarepa. And here's what Rechampa's thinking as he's approaching Milarepa. He says, I have gone to India twice, and this time I went according to the commands of my guru in order to benefit beings and Buddhist teaching. But that's not exactly true. What happened was Rechampa wanted to go to India? And he kept pestering Milarepa, I want to go, I want to go. And Milarepa said, well, it'd be good if you just stayed here and meditated. But if you have to go, go. You have my blessing, go. So it wasn't exactly that he had the full blessing of his teacher. But anyway, he said, and this is the part, the prideful part, he said, I am more learned in scriptures and logic than Milarepa, although he has greater blessing and compassion. When he greets me, he says, I wonder if he's going to prostrate to me. Well, Milarepa sees Rajampa coming, and because he knows his student well, he knows that he's full of pride. And he's certainly not going to prostrate to a student who is as proud as he is. And here's what Milarepa says. Is this pride of Rajampa because of some evil done by the Turks, by non-Buddhists in India? Or is it by the course of some demon? So it must have been pretty strong. I mean, he was actually seeing his students as different than what he was before he left. And he said, I wonder if that's because he's filled with a whole bunch of gossip from the Turks, from non-Buddhists, or is he actually filled with a demon? And he says, I must use methods to clear away this obstacle of pride. So a less gifted teacher might say, oh, he's full of pride, go on your way, get out of my hair. I don't need this. But he doesn't. He said, I'll use skillful methods to keep him around and help him get over his pride. So Milarepa sings one of his songs. He does this throughout this book, songs of awakening, songs that indicate his realization. And basically, Milarepa says, this song that he sings, he repeats over and over again, I am happy. I'm happy that I don't have a lot of thoughts going on in my mind. I live a simple life. I'm complete in the practices I do. I don't need a bunch of texts and so forth and so on. And it's basically in response to what he knows Rajampa is going to do. So he keeps saying to Rajampa, I'm happy, I'm pleased with my being here in Tibet and staying here. And then he says to Rajampa, son Rajampa, have you returned from India? And all the places you went and paths you took, have your mind and body been free of fatigue? And they weren't. You'll find that out in the story. And then he says to Rajampa, are you free of pride and self-regard? Is all that you have done for the benefit of beings? So he's already questioning Milarepa. One of the lessons we can learn here is that to travel the Buddhist path to its fullest, it requires us to overcome our pride. And if we were to use just a few words to describe what pride means, it means to surrender to the truth that we see in our gurus, in our teachers. I won't give Rajampa's reply to what Milarepa said. I'll simply tell you that he bragged. He said, I've learned this, I've learned that, I've got these texts, I've got these kind of things, and I want to show them to you. And then he says, Rajampa says to Milarepa, since all this came to pass because of your previous activity with me, because you taught me and because you told me to go to India, please see if it is suitable for you. And then he says, and invest me with due praise and honor. So he's saying, gee, I've done all this, I've gone through all these hardships. It's time now, maybe you give me a little praise, reward me. And of course, Milarepa can't do that, because if he praised him, if he honored him for all of his effort, it doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of good done by Rechampa in going to India and collecting all these texts. It doesn't mean that. It means I can't reward you. I can't praise you right now because you're so full of pride. And if I were to praise you right now, what would happen? You would only increase your pride. So Milarepa is silent to his student who wants his praise. And then he says to Rechampa, Rechampa, whom I have raised since you were a little boy, don't boast of your hardships. Listen to my song. And then he says, son, regarding yourself highly over these key instructions I give you, means you want your mind stream to stray into corruption. He's saying that pride will only corrupt you. It's going to destroy you. So you've got to be careful. Saying lots about Dharma with empty words mean you want to put to your good meditation. You want to put a stop to your good meditation. So yak about your experiences or how great your trip was or that sort of thing. It's not good. It's going to destroy your meditation. Boasting so much about what you did means you want to waver over accepting your guru. And that's seen, he is saying, my ego should be bowed down to, just like I bow down to my teacher. And that's not going to work. It doesn't work at any time, but it especially does not work in the Vajrayana. And then he says to Rechampa, my handsome son. And apparently, Rechampa was a good-looking fellow. He said, my handsome son, if this is reasonable, then keep it in your heart. So if my admonition about your pride is true, keep it in your heart. If it's not reasonable, then do as you please. So it's saying if you can't accept this, well, then you're going to do as you please. And, you have to go about your business with this pride. And he said, this is sort of a funny part. He said, if it's not reasonable, then do as you please. And he says, I am an old man with fear of death, so I don't have time for a lengthy chatter. So he's not going to go into all the little details about his, how great his experiences were while he was in India. Since you're young and you think so well of yourself, you'll deride in return the one who tells you you are prideful, ill-mannered, and use coarse language. In other words, you won't listen to me if what you do is sit around and being proud of yourself. So at this point, Milarepa runs ahead of Rechampa. He's tired of listening. He runs ahead. And so Rechampa has to run along with him. And he's exhausted from his trip, so it's hard for him to keep up with Milarepa, who's supposedly was able to run very fast. So even at an old age, he was able to run very fast. So you can sort of imagine Rechampa again telling him about how great his trip was, blah, blah, blah. And he's breathless and he can't keep up with his teacher and Milarepa is not really listening to him very well anyway. He's just, but finally he sits down. Milarepa sits down on a stone. And he says, and this is probably the most important part of his instructions to Rechampa. And he says, having listened to all this stuff again while he's running, he says, it is excellent if the father and son are harmonious. And in this case, they aren't harmonious. Rechampa wants something that Milarepa cannot give him. Rechampa wants praise and reward. And Milarepa can't give that to him. So they aren't truly harmonious. So it said, and I'll read this fairly quickly. It is excellent that the father and son are harmonious. To be harmonious with all is truly king, and to be harmonious with your father is king of kings. To be discordant with everyone is a bad portent. To be discordant with your father is a portent of demons. One should repay one's mother's kindness. Conduct that's harmonious with people is comely. By pleasing your Dharma friends, your wishes are fulfilled. By pleasing your guru, blessings will come. By regarding yourself humbly, you perform self-benefit. A practitioner is one who relinquishes their bad attitude. So he's saying, because of Rechampa's pride, and because Milarepa won't return praise for his accomplishments because he doesn't want to add to that problem, Rechampa's got a bad attitude. And he said, a practitioner is one who relinquishes a bad attitude. If you honor others' disparagement, people might put you down a bit. That's loving kindness. If you maintain humility, you will gain renown. If you're without hypocrisy, your samaya is pure. If you spend time with noble ones, the qualities develop. If you have few concepts, malicious gossip is blocked. If you have great bodhicitta, excellence comes. These are the things that the learned have done. A fool doesn't distinguish between the two. So he's saying, you know, your pride's in the way here, young man. You got to overcome it. I'm not going to reward this pride of yours, and don't expect it. And then Milarepa in the end says, there is not one of these texts that you have that I am separate from. I already know them. So, son, don't be bound by arrogant fame seeking. Go and meditate in solitary retreats. So he said, rather than trying to extend your fame because you've got these texts and this experience, rather than do that, let's go meditate. So that's the end of that first part. There's another part to the story, and this is the part of the Yaks One. So the story goes where Milarepa then sought after hearing his teacher. He says to himself, if I had another guru, upon my return to India, I would have received a cheerful and warm welcome and been praised. I've spent time in India and learned all these teachings, attained enlightenment through austerities and hardship will not do. I should be able to meditate and practice with desirable objects. So I said, having done all these austerities, all these things to get me. And it was an austere trip. I mean, it's difficult back in the 11th century to travel from India to Tibet and back. It would have been a hard trip. But he's saying, I should be praised for that. I should not have to, I should have it easy now. I should be practiced with desirable objects. And Milarepa is not buying it. He's saying instead of doing that, you ought to be and come with me and retreat. So the next part of the story is about the Yaks One. And I won't go into too many details here. Simply put, in Rachampa's mind, he saw his teacher in a small form and an opening of a yak horn. At the same time, Milarepa did not reduce in size. I don't know how that would be. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading this story, would I be able to see Milarepa diminished in size and inside of a yak horn, and at the same time see him as a regular sized human being? And I don't know, probably not. But in the eyes of Rachampa, he did see him that size, and at the same time see him as regular size. Odd, isn't it? But this is through the eyes of Rachampa. And what the story tells me, I think, and this is me thinking, I think that Rachampa had enough faith to be able to see what Milarepa wanted to project in that yak horn, which was his own image. He had that much faith. But then Milarepa says, come on down, come on in here with me. And he couldn't do it. Rachampa couldn't do it. So I think he had faith, but he didn't have sufficient faith to join him there. The story also has another meaning for us less enlightened beings. And the story is basically, you don't have to be larger than life to be a wonderful teacher. Khenpo Kaktu Rinpoche lived a very, I don't want to say small life, but his life was very small in a way that he basically lived much of his life, particularly towards the end of his life, at Karmi Ling and within the confines of the Lama house. And yet he was one of, well, to my mind, one of the greatest teachers in North America. But he lived a life that was not famous in the sense of, lights and, big productions. He was very humble. And I think maybe for us, this story about Milarepa is that just because a teacher doesn't have, isn't handsome, doesn't have big words and so forth like that, doesn't make them a bad teacher. In fact, it makes them a great teacher. Great teachers are humble. And that was a lesson that Rachampa had yet to learn. And he said he was a little worried about Rachampa. Milarepa said, my son, Rachampa's conduct is like the wind. Sometimes it's calm and sometimes it's rushing. Between calm and rushing, stop and think. Don't be so hurried, my cloth-clad attendant. If the son is equal to the father, then come inside this yak's horn a comfortable and spacious house is inside the Yaks One. Well, you can do it. And so Milarepa comes out of the yak horn, and then Richampa says, the judgment's power, that's Milarepa's power, may be real or it may not be. But I know that I'm cold and I'm hungry and I want to go someplace and eat. So they go to, then this is the next part of the story, they go to a village, and they come to this older woman's home, and they ask and they beg for food, and she basically waves them off saying, I've given all that I can, and you go beg someplace else. So they left, and they camped out in the village. And the next day, they found that the old woman had died. And so again, Milarepa is using the events that are occurring to help Richampa reduce his own pride. And so they're standing over this dead woman's corpse, and Milarepa is pointing out some lessons that will hopefully help Richampa overcome his pride. He said, Milarepa said, when the understanding of impermanence arises in your mind stream, all activities become Dharma practice. You're victorious over the demon of laziness. And in the case of this old woman last night, the time of death cannot be known. Richampa, don't let your mind stream be hardened. Listen to your guru. So he's using the occasion of this woman's death to help Richampa to overcome his pride. He's saying, look, we don't have a lot of time here. Concentrate on the fact that life is so short and get over your pride. And then he said later on, Milarepa said, look at the perceiving mind inside. It's impermanent, like a little bird in the trees. It doesn't stay where you put it. That makes me uneasy. I'm a little worried about you, Richampa. Your mind won't stay on things, and it goes from here to there, basically because you want, to be praised. And then he says, Richampa, has your mind achieved stability? When I think of this, I remember the sublime Dharma. So he's saying, come back. Come on back to the Dharma. Come back to teaching the sublime Dharma. Stop being so concerned about you, your position, who you are, and the fact that you have all this knowledge. Come on back to the sublime Dharma. Teach that. The second part of the story is about the Yaks One, and we talked about that. And so in response to what Milarepa said, he says, so tell me, what's your experience been? Come on, tell me about it. And so, of course, Richampa was very happy to talk about it. He said, I did this, I did that, I was great at this, I was great at that. And basically, after each experience, he says, what a delight it was, how great it was. And Milarepa said, well, that would be all great. And that would be indicating that you followed your guru's instructions. But he said, you must have this kind of view toward those experiences, that they are your guru's blessing. However, it doesn't seem to be so. It's basically you're out there bragging about what you've done. So what is the experience that Milarepa wishes for Recampa more than any other experience. All those things are nice that he experienced, and they were delightful and could be a sign of the Guru's favor. But what is the one experience that Recampa did not state that was most important? Well, Milarepa says in response, when compassion arises deep within my heart, I see that sentient beings of the three realms of samsara are like they entered a pit of fire. So what Milarepa's wish for Recampa is that he have compassion on beings, that foremost of all of his experiences. And of course, that seemed to be lacking. And what took its place was pride. Milarepa ends this by saying, I have fully realized this precious human birth, and this yogi has completed all that is to be done. Son, do you have anything like this? And of course he didn't. And he said, don't have such great pride. And so he said, let's go and meditate. And again, Recampa says, I'm too tired. I can't do it. I just simply cannot do it. And so Milarepa says, though my advice would be helpful, you won't give it any heed. To one with the mistaken view of self-regard, speaking straightforwardly is just a waste. If you meditate, then come and follow me. If not, then you can just do what you want. And so, again, Recampa says, I just can't. I'm sorry. But here's the point. The point is, Milarepa didn't give up on him. And there's a happy ending to this story. And it's in the next story, and I won't go into it because I don't think we have a lot of time left. But basically, it did have a happy ending. And Recampa repented for his pride and became an illustrious student and teacher based upon repenting of his great pride. So that's the story of Recampa and Milarepa. This relationship we have between student and teacher is a dynamic, lively one. And the teacher is always committed to never giving up. And as long as the student doesn't give up, they will meet. The teacher is up here beckoning us to come to see reality as it really is. And if we are devoted and faithful, we will see that reality. But what happens is our trajectory towards enlightenment can be thrown off by our pride, way off, to the point that we just simply continue to circle in samsara. So whether you're a beginning student in Buddhism or an advanced one, pride is the biggest obstacle we all have to overcome. And when our teachers are not seeming to reward us for our accomplishments, know why that is. So my wish for myself, my wish for you is that we all overcome our pride, become devoted to the instructions our teachers, our true authentic teachers are giving out to us. And that with humility we accept them, because it's only then that we can be a good example to others. Thank you. May you have a great week, and may your practice flourish. Thank you very much. Take care.